and welcome to another edition of the David Tomsic Show, fighting tyranny one day at a time. The Russia-Ukraine war, 3 years and counting. What's going on there? A lot of people dying, a lot of money spent, and no closer to solving the problem. So, what's happening? Well, as you remember, Donald Trump promised to end the Russia-Ukraine war right after he got elected. And of course, that never happened. And those of us with common sense knew that that was never going to happen. Having followed the war myself for 3 years, I knew that you're just not going to walk in and tell them to put their arms down and go home. Not going to happen. Very complex. A lot of happening here. But recently, American diplomats under Donald Trump's direction and Ukrainian diplomats met and came up with this ceasefire, 30-day ceasefire. We hear a lot about this. Middle East, they use these same types of ceasefires. Now, they presented this to Vladimir Putin, and there is mixed signals here. And I have an article from NPR. But before I talk about the article, you need to know a little bit. America's not exempt from this problem. As much as it's Russia's fault, they invaded Ukraine. They've used a lot of good reasoning behind their aggression. Whether you agree with it or not, it's not my point. See, I'm not here to pick sides for people. I'm here to give you the point of view of those involved in the conflict. And in 2014, America, the empire known as America, did it again. We went in and we overthrew a government. This time it was a pro-Russian government, and we replaced it with what? Oh, a pro-Western government. What are the odds of that? What did Russia do? Well, they marched into Crimea. That's their only warm water port for the Russian Navy. They took it. Guess what? That's an invasion, right? Yeah. But you know what the United States would have done? Oh, wait a minute. They'd have invaded too. You see, the U.S., the empire known as the U.S., does this stuff all the time. We get away with it because we have really good publicity. We own all the TV stations and newspapers, and we own the money we give everybody to say, hey, keep quiet and let us do what we want to do. We've done this for decades. So that's what happened. Right off the bat, you might say, well, David, why did they then invade? Well, there were some other issues within Ukraine. There's a Russian-speaking territory, and there's a Ukrainian-speaking territory. And there was conflicts going on between them for years. A lot of atrocities. I'm not going to go down that road because guess what? You can go and read this for yourself. Eventually, Russia decided that it's time to go in and end this. Whatever the true reasons behind it, I don't know. They're using the reason that, Ukraine was hurting Russian people, Russian-speaking people, and they went in and they started this war. Right now, they have almost all the provinces that are Russian-speaking. I think just about all of them. Now, will they stop there? I believe they'll stop at those lines of demarcation. I believe they'll stop at where the Russian-speaking people are and the Ukrainian-speaking people are, because I don't think they can afford to take over all of Europe. They don't have the manpower. They don't. It's just not going to happen. So this brings me to the ceasefire. Russia has almost all that they want. There is still a large battle going on within a province in Russia called Kursk. Ukraine invaded that last year with some of their top troops. This battle's been going on for a while. But of course, Russia owns the escalatory advantage. They eventually were able to bring more and more troops in, and I believe much of the Ukrainian army, if not all of it, is now surrounded in some parts. Russia wants to finish them off. But now you have this ceasefire. We won't stop until these people are dead, according to Vladimir Putin, because they invaded our country, oddly enough, right? But you're going to have a ceasefire. So what happens there? Well, let me read this article and give you a little bit of Vladimir's side on this. Now, this is from NPR. Putin voices doubts over U.S. proposed ceasefire with Ukraine and sets conditions. Of course he does. Russian President Vladimir Putin said Thursday he supported the general idea of a U.S.-backed ceasefire with Ukraine. But he listed a number of conditions that would need to be met. Of course he does. We agree with the proposals to halt the fighting, but we proceed from the assumption that the ceasefire should lead to a lasting peace and remove the root causes of the crisis, he said in a news conference. Putin made the comments as President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, visited Moscow to discuss the ceasefire plan, more than 3 years into Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine. The visit was 2 days after the U.S. Ukrainian officials held talks in Saudi Arabia, in which Ukraine agreed to enact an immediate interim 30-day ceasefire. But Putin said a month-long ceasefire might give Ukraine's forces a chance to retreat, regroup, and rearm, just as Russia's armies gained the upper hand in the Kursk region, parts of which were captured by Kyiv last year. Does this mean Ukraine will use those 30 days to continue forced mobilization, get weapons supplied, and prepare its mobilized units, the Russian president said? And Putin questioned how such a ceasefire would be enforced. Who will give orders to cease hostilities? And what will these orders be worth, he asked. Well, Volodymyr Zelensky had a quote here in response. In his evening video address, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called Putin's response predictable and manipulative. Wow, okay, so you can see this is where it's going. Putin's going to not join this ceasefire. He has the upper hand. As I mentioned, he has escalatory advantage. He has a majority of the space and the territory he wants. Now, Vladimir Putin is in the driver's seat here. He has escalatory advantage, as I mentioned. Yeah, he's losing soldiers. Yeah, it's costing them money. But in the long run, they're going to get what they want here. He's not going to retreat. He's not going to drop his weapons and leave Ukraine, which many people believe, and it's what Vladimir Zelensky wants him to do. I don't believe that's going to happen. And I understand what the Ukrainian position is. Give us our territory back. But it's not going to happen. It's already been fought over. It's been bled over. And the Russians are not going to retreat from it. It's going to take a mighty big stick for them to get out of Ukraine. It's not going to happen. So where does it go from here? What is Trump's plan from this point forward? There has to be more than this ceasefire. There has to be. Now, Putin wants guarantees. You know what Putin wants? He wants Ukraine to never be in NATO. He wants them to not have an army. He wants them to not have any American weapons on their soil. And he wants to have complete control of the Russian-speaking territories in Ukraine, which he's already conquered. This is an ugly situation. Too many men have died over this. Now, I'm going to give you a tip. This could have been prevented. Now, I'm going to tell you something that nobody wants to hear. The United States could have stopped this completely. They could have prevented this war years ago. They could have sat down with the Russians then and said, listen, we won't take Ukraine. We don't want Ukraine. We're not going to manually put troops in Ukraine. We're not going to put offensive weapons in Ukraine, and they will not become part of NATO. What difference would it have made? Well, to a lot of troops that died in this war, it would have made a big difference. Too often, we're trying to fight battles that we don't need to fight. Was Russia really somebody we needed to worry about? Were they? Were they going to challenge us in the world for global hegemony? No. Russia is not a big enough country. They don't have the numbers we have, although weapon-wise they do. They are a nuclear power, and that makes them formidable. China is the one that the United States should have been worrying about. We should not have let this escalate to where it is today, to an impossible situation that may not be able to be solved. I don't know that it can, and I don't know that it ever will be solved. Let's pray for the people in Ukraine, and also let's pray for the people in Russia that cooler heads prevail, that somehow this can be solved with no more bloodshed. That's all the time I have. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Please make sure you go over to our sister channel and watch Nights Around the Fire with me and my co-host Ashley Hamilton, where we talk about everything that's a mystery in this world. You'll enjoy it. I'll put a link to that video in the description box. Outside of that, God bless you, and I'll see you next time right here on The David Tomsic Show. God bless you.